You didn't think I was done with Grand Theft Auto 4 just yet, did you? The video I did was deliberately lacking a crucial aspect of this game, which, as you can imagine, is the DLC. Episodes from Liberty City comprises 2 expansions, The Lost and Damned, and The Ballad of Gay Tony. And for simplicity's sake, I'm going to dedicate a video to each, starting with The Lost and Damned. This is the first of the 2 GTA 4 expansions, and as you can imagine, I've never played it. This is the Grand Theft Auto 4 DLC I never played, but I also didn't play the other one, so that will be the other Grand Theft Auto 4 DLC I never played. And that is about as intuitive as my titling process gets. In this video you're going to get my account of my first playthrough of Grand Theft Auto 4, The Lost and Damned, and I mean there's not much else to it really, it's just that. And you can expect a similar video on The Ballad of Gay Tony, hopefully following not too far down the line. Anyway, I don't really have anything else to say in this introduction, so should be a laugh, let's begin. In The Lost and Damned, we are no longer playing as a fundamentally traumatized Eastern European. Instead, we are playing as a fundamentally traumatized face. We play as Johnny Klebitz, a member of the Lost Motorcycle Club. So in this expansion, we are part of a biker gang, where we and our boys wear identical uniforms, stroll around, causing mayhem and disrespecting other road users, all while refusing to wear a helmet because safety is communism. And if you do that, you may as well drive a Lada. And Johnny is the second in command, or vice president, of the Lost. He even has a cute little tag that says it, and I can't imagine any unforeseen consequences stemming from wearing a tag that allows people to know your strategic value to your criminal organisation. Anyway, the Lost and Damned story begins with the president, the leader of the gang, being released from prison or rehab or wherever he was, but he doesn't appear to have been reformed, he's just on parole. This man's name is Billy Gray, and during his time away, Johnny was the de facto leader of the gang, in which the gang enjoyed some relative peace, which this man is about to fuck right up. From jump, Johnny and Billy fundamentally disagree about how the gang should be run, a conflict that plays out over the course of the narrative. Where Johnny wishes to take a relaxed approach to things and think actions through methodically, Billy's a tad more aggro, and thus peace and calm are completely out the window. But then again, not shooting people is boring anyway. As a result of getting out of rehab and shooting people, the Lost find themselves entering a new chapter of an old conflict with a rival motorcycle club named the Angels of Death. And if their in-game website is anything to go by, they're a questionable bunch. And though Johnny does disagree with Billy's approach, for the time being he goes along with it. And since we're playing as him, he quickly proves to be an absolute weapon. All the while somewhere else in Liberty City, the main narrative of GTA 4 is playing out. And it does overlap a little bit. For example, this guy is murdered by Niko Bellic. In fact, the DLC does make his unceremonious off-screen from this perspective death quite obvious.
You coming back?
I'd love to, man, but I'm seeing this hot Russian broad over on Firefly Island. Gonna drink a daddy's expensive vodka and fuck her under the pier.
Just got word that Jason's been killed up in Broken.
The overlap does highlight that the 2 occurring narratives are doing so simultaneously, but it's also a little bit jarring in an amusing way above all else, but I'll explain that when we come to it. Anyway, that event serves to spur on the conflict with the Angels of Death, even if they had nothing to do with that particular murder. And hang on, why is this guy just on fire? He doesn't particularly seem bothered though, so... Anyway, these continued activities eventually result in Billy becoming arrested again, for which he rather openly blames Johnny.
Fuck you, Johnny! You're dead!
Shut your goddamn mouth! Shut your mouth!
Dead! Shut up!
As with Billy's arrest, Johnny is once again the leader of the Lost MC. And Billy's personal yes-man Brian is not awfully thrilled with that turn of events, forming a faction within the Lost that opposes Johnny's leadership. They don't have a name, so we'll call them the Tunnel Snakes.
Tunnel Snakes rule!
And I suppose all of that establishes the tone of The Lost and Damned. Unlike many GTA stories, it's not really about working your way up the ranks or anything like that. You're already rather high up the ranks pretty early on. What this narrative is about is almost the opposite. This is everything you've built falling apart. And I suppose in this instance that's everything that Johnny built. Because up until this point you're led to believe that his life is a bit of an utter mess. His life consists of committing criminal offences, perhaps against his own best wishes. His attitude towards the world carries over the main game's theme of cynicism and disillusionment. He gets blamed for Billy's own mistakes catching up to him, leading to a civil war within the gang. And his peculiar love interest Ashley is addicted to meth. And that's not the kind of problem you can fix with a rocket launcher, though believe me, I tried. And amongst all of that, Johnny still manages to be quite a moral character. He doesn't like violence and killing unless he can justify it in his head, and he frequently opposes brash, aggressive decisions, and despite that, he's still loyal to Billy, even though that backfires, and perhaps most importantly, he's loyal to his chapter of the Lost, his brothers, and that loyalty has him stuck in a lifestyle that conflicts with his personal beliefs, and following his assumption as the role of president of the Lost, he now has Billy's mess to clean up. With the gang both at war internally and externally, there is no clean getaway from the reality of Liberty City's criminal underworld anymore. Not too dissimilarly to Nico, Johnny is propelled by his baggage. And that puts Johnny at a recurring collision course with the man who actually inadvertently caused half of these problems in Nico, as Nico is the one who actually killed Jason, even though Billy used that as an excuse to further go at the Angels of Death. And it goes both ways. Johnny causes Nico problems that he never really knows about as well. For example, due to Ashley's drug debts, at one point Johnny is tasked with abducting Roman Bellic. Obviously he never realises this is Nico's cousin, so when these characters interact they do so as passing allies, even though you can make a case for them actually being the opposite. And the point is, because neither of them really know that, they become a loose end in each other's stories that never get wrapped up. But for Johnny, either by his own decision or Billy's before him, is reacting to how things seem rather than how they are, putting into perspective the fragility of his situation and by extension the situation of the Lost Motorcycle Club chapter, at the very least within Liberty City. And under those conditions its downfall was almost certainly inevitable. It is clever how the characters bear significance to one another's plots without ever intending to, but I do find it amusing that if both Nico and Johnny knew what the other had done, they'd probably just shoot each other. Also, the bloke who appears in this window is the protagonist of the Ballad of Gay Tony, isn't he? I look forward to playing that expansion. Anyway, what I like about how The Lost and Damned, and I presume the Ballad of Gay Tony will be no different, is their proximity to Grand Theft Auto 4's main narrative. They occur concurrently and intersect where appropriate. For example, Johnny's story adds context to Nico's, and Nico's story gives you pre-context before you dive into Johnny's. And that's done without making the stories different perspectives on the same thing. There's certainly a similar cynical commentary, but they're accents to narratives with altogether different start and end points. It's striking a balance between having a clean slate on a similar backdrop and acknowledging the fact that other stories have been told there. And in return for bothering to do so, Liberty City feels far more lived in. Furthermore, we're also viewing Liberty City from a different perspective. Unlike Nico's very gradual introduction to Liberty City, Johnny's been here for a while. He already has established relations with various characters, allowing for the story to take on an entirely different pacing and dynamic. We don't need to spend time being introduced to and then building up a relationship with characters on a one-by-one basis, and before too long we're thrust into the plot relevant content and therefore the action along with it. As you can accept at face value, these characters know each other and forego the long-winded approach of getting to know each of them in believable detail individually. Instead, you learn more about the characters naturally as the plot deems it relevant, and if anything it's guilty of not doing that enough. But it is only a DLC, and it's only got a limited amount of time to play with. Anyhow, as The Lost and Damned progresses, the story shifts, and becomes an existential question regarding the gang's ability to survive in Liberty City. After making enemies due to Billy's immature sense of pride, his subsequent arrest and the pressure that puts Johnny under, especially with the authorities, the less than ethical criminal practices the Lost are involved with outside of going to war with another motorcycle club, and the association with high-ranking officials asking for corrupt favours, not to mention Johnny's own soft spot for a woman with a crippling drug problem, it becomes very clear the net is closing in on the Lost. And with so much betrayal within the chapter, the few loyal remaining members of the gang need to make their actions count before they disappear, and so ties begin to get cut. On the less extreme end of that spectrum, Johnny seemingly cuts ties with Ashley, accepting and not allowing her bad decisions to rule his life, but more on that later. But on the other end of that spectrum, Johnny and a few members of the Lost shoot up an entire prison simply to kill Billy, who had sold Johnny out and also intended to further testify against him. After that, they return to their long-compromised safe house and burn it to the ground, seemingly leaving Liberty City behind, and along with it, the Lost. At least for the time being. It's a tragic narrative that I quite enjoyed, though I would argue it hasn't exactly aged well. And what I mean by that is Grand Theft Auto 5 did it dirty, and in my opinion significantly reduced it. You see, we briefly see Johnny Klebitz again in Grand Theft Auto 5, in a scenario in which he's confronting Trevor for conducting naughty business with Ashley. And as you can imagine, Trevor, being an unpredictable psychopath, has more to say in the way of response than some disrespectful words, proceeding to push him to the floor and stamp him to death, giving Johnny a very pathetic conclusion to his life, one in which he's gone back on cutting off Ashley, and also appears to be addled with problems stemming from first-hand drug abuse. And though it's a superb way to highlight Trevor's dangerous and unpredictable nature, it does arguably disrespect the narrative of The Lost and Damned. Johnny reverts portions of his character development off-screen, and then he's simply killed off instantly as if he never held any significance whatsoever. And though that has no bearing on the overall quality of The Lost and Damned if experienced in a vacuum, it does retroactively make it harder to give a shit, because you know that some of the character development is going to revert to an extent we'll never be given the context to understand, and what isn't reverted is rendered meaningless, and any prospect of headcanon is curb-stomped to death along with Johnny under the boot of a man with a hairline receding so badly that I'd argue it's the full-blown tactical. Now, if anybody can pull off an unsatisfying major character death, it's Rockstar. And though it's rather isolated from the direct quality of The Lost and Damned and even GTA 5, I can't help but feel as if on a meta level, Johnny's demise cheapens The Lost and Damned by some margin, and that is a bit of a shame. Overall though, I can't really argue with the Lost and Damned storyline. It wasn't as thought-evoking as the main story of the base game, but it was framed as a complementing accessory, and it handled that very well. It's not something I'd argue to be a spectacular storytelling experience either, but it's decent. But look, I respect your time, so let's hop on to some other things. For example, when you play The Lost and Damned, the first thing you'd probably notice is this really awkward piss yellow filter, as there are styling differences between this and base GTA 4. For example, the minimap is a bit more cluttered with this grime effect, and the font accordingly differs when street names and so on crop up. It's a bit harder on the eyes, but I can appreciate the attention to detail. But on the topic of gameplay, there was one key difference that I was really chuffed about. Missions in The Lost and Damned have checkpoints. The one thing that got on my nerves about GTA 4's base main storyline is the lack of checkpoints. If at any point during a mission you fail, you had to restart the entire mission. It was an aspect that artificially inflated difficulty at times, however the rest of the time at worst it was frustrating or tedious, because more often than not you'd have done the hard bit and then die stupidly, like your motorcycle falling on top of you. And no matter at what point you do fail, if you fail before the mission's over, you've got to do the entire mission again. The Lost and Damned having checkpoints in its missions makes it instantly more forgiving, but at the same time it also gives the mission design a bit of freedom to throw something unexpected in there every now and then. But primarily I think this was implemented because at times you can just fail missions out of nowhere. So because there are more elements of trial and error, it makes much more sense for this checkpoint format to be present. As another consequence, intensity can be a bit less predictable, which keeps things interesting. But what was relieving above all else was not feeling the urge to introduce your controller to the concept of defenestration every single time you died. And though it does boot you out the mission and you still have to hit retry on your phone, not having to redo the entire mission is a huge quality of life improvement, even if half the time all it's cutting out is you driving somewhere. Because more often than not, having to do that over and over is a bit more challenging on the mind than something that might actually be difficult. Another difference from the main game is the fact that during main story missions, it's rare that there are moments where Johnny is alone. Okay, it's not terribly rare, but the point is, often he's with members of the same motorcycle gang, and that does allow for the implementation of certain mechanics. For example, when you stick to formation when riding, you can actually heal yourself and add armor without having to pay anything. Furthermore, you can monitor the battle hardiness of your comrades based on how many fights you've actually taken them to, and you can call them for help. Though outside of the mission where it was introduced as a feature, I never saw where it would be useful. Make no mistake, I'm sure there are moments that it helps, and you'll be reminded regularly that this feature exists. But above all else, it's a nice thing to have. As for driving in The Lost and Damned, you don't find yourself operating cars very often. The game actually goes as far as discouraging it, but it proportions itself such that it isn't really an issue. You see, as a biker, Johnny Klebitz holds nothing but disdain for cars, which he refers to as cages. I personally think it would have been an interesting dynamic if he didn't know how to operate one, but he can drive a car just like any GTA protagonist, and that's fine. For some missions, however, you need to bring a motorcycle to be able to begin them. More specific still, apparently you also need to use Johnny's personal bike in order to ride in formation with the Lost. And if you lose your bike, all you need to do is make a phone call to a guy named Clay and he will replace it for you. And when you do that, you have various options to choose from, as the expansion introduces 16 new motorcycles. And better yet, I find these bikes are quite agreeable to operate. But despite that being the case, thanks to the in-game AI, riding in formation can still be quite interesting. And by that I mean you're not the only one who can fall off of these things. The level of scuff for the most part is just amusing, so I'm not going to mark this expansion down in my head for that. Furthermore, taxis still do have Bradford mode. That's nice. On the combat front, there are new weapons in The Lost and Damned, such as this weapon, which from cover is like a shotgun, but when you aim it, you can use it like an assault rifle, and within seconds, cars explode. So I bless this assault shotgun, the game imbalancer. The sawn-off shotgun is nice, the automatic pistol is nicer, and you can't really argue with a grenade launcher as it launches grenades. And if you need ammunition at any point, you don't have to buy it anymore, you can simply bell up a mate and sort it out. But I've saved the best new implementation for last. Pipe bombs. The implementation of pipe bombs is as awkward as it is funny, as they simply operate like grenades, and you're tasked with using them to blow up moving targets, which doesn't really work out all that well. I defaulted to the rocket launcher, so pipe bombs themselves aren't all that useful. I like to think the game just wanted you to have them. But as we've already established, giving me explosives has the same impact as performing brain surgery with a meat grinder. It works only technically, but with consequences. Anyway, let's talk side content. Obviously you've got the character related side missions, which are always nice, but there are also races and gang wars to engage in. The races are obviously motorbike races, and there's a bit of a twist. You can whack people with a bat. It's quite fun. I mean, it makes the start of a race a bit mental, but everybody just takes each other out, and then coming first is really no challenge in the slightest. I didn't do many of those, as races don't really engage me, but there are a few. As for gang wars, they're also very straightforward. You and members of the Lost kill members of a rival motorcycle club, and this helps battle harden your posse, as it were. But realistically it's checklist content, so it's nothing special. Besides from that, you can also do jobs stealing bikes for a man named Angus. Fitting. Or, before the end of the story at least, you can engage in various activities around the clubhouse, such as arm wrestling and playing pool. And in my opinion, you just can't argue with a game of pool, can you? You can also engage in internet activities. One of these days, I swear to God, I'm going to find out who the undercover lover is. And of course, as always, you save the game by sleeping in a bed. And perhaps annoyingly, it uses the same save slots as the base game, which means you'll have to override base game saves to save in The Lost and Damned if you're like me, and you use up all of the slots for one playthrough. But if you're sane and just use 1 or 2 per playthrough, I'd imagine it's not that big of a deal. You can't help but feel as if it's a touch awkward though. As for the 2 safe houses you get to save the game in this DLC, they're both on Alderney to the west of the map, which means if anything is going on far afield and you like saving in between missions so you don't have a game crash and then lose progress, though the autosave feature is present, it's not the most reliable. You're going to begin to notice how awkward that is. And that's about it as far as side content goes. It's not great, it's not terrible, it's just decent. So to conclude this video, I quite like Grand Theft Auto 4 The Lost and Damned. I think it has some rather obvious weaknesses when compared to the base game, but it was always going to, considering it has to be a significantly shorter narrative and significantly lesser in content because it's an expansion. It's not a game of its own, though you could certainly treat it as one. Aside from a few bumps and scratches, and the fact that GTA 5 undermined the Lost and Damned main story's significance, It retains the most crucial role of a game, being a fantastic way to kill a few hours. And it does that whilst also helping enrich the lore of Liberty City. So though it's far from perfect, it realistically doesn't go far wrong. And it complements the main story of GTA 4 fairly well, continuing the commentary of cynicism and disillusionment with the American lifestyle and dream. And hopefully I've managed to pay it adequate reverence today. And that really concludes today's video, as I see no reason to drag it out any further, and it would look wrong if it wound up being longer than my video on the base game, wouldn't it? So thank you all for watching this video on the Grand Theft Auto 4 DLC I never played, and I'll probably be doing a video soon on the Ballad of Gay Tony, the other Grand Theft Auto 4 DLC I've never played, which I will be fixing very soon. If you enjoyed my Fool's account of a 15-year-old expansion to a 16-year-old game, I'd appreciate it if you familiarised yourself with that like button. And if you're new, maybe hit subscribe and share the channel with your friends and all that wonderful stuff, because that would be fantastic. But I'm going to leave you now, so with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point. But until next time, please take care, and goodbye.